Hi, welcome to Reigniting Small Business, the podcast from Spark Business Institute. I'm Laura Richards, and today I'm here with Patrick Lee to talk about organizational gravity. So, Patrick, why don't you start by explaining to us what is organizational gravity?
Organizational gravity is the concept of what holds an organization together. It's the gravitational force holding it together and driving it somewhere. So organizational gravity is basically the idea that all the stakeholders, everyone involved, has an understanding of where we're going, where we're going, how we plan on getting there, and how we're measuring it. And so organizational gravity in application is a series of questions related to every area of the business that helps everybody understand what are we looking at and allows everybody to sort of weigh in. When done right, organizational gravity makes sure that there's an understood vision and that everybody is moving towards that.
So you and I were talking when we were discussing bringing organizational gravity to the podcast about a case study that you had done with one of your clients. I think walking people through that might give us a good idea of how we would apply organizational gravity in our own businesses and what some of the benefits are.
Yeah, well, this was an interesting case because the business approached me, and they were a relatively successful business. They were doing well. They had expanded their workforce from just the United States to overseas. They had folks working in other countries. They were relatively successful, but they were coming to me very, very frustrated because things felt sort of out of control, and not, the partners weren't quite in sync, and everything wasn't, it didn't feel as successful as it should have felt, as it should have been. And so they were trying to figure out what's going on here. They felt it was a culture thing. So they brought me in, and we started doing some exercises, and it culminated with me bringing all of the major players in the organization together for was basically a forum. And we basically applied the organizational gravity concepts at this forum. And as we were exploring, as we were asking questions, as we were laying out the vision, the mission, the philosophy, and seeing where that business was, it became very, very clear that the reason they were struggling so much is that they had completed their vision. Their vision had actually, everything about it was done. So a vision is something that you're striving for. The organization is constantly looking out and striving to reach that vision. It's supposed to continually pull you towards it. Well, they'd already done it all. So the vision was done. They were basically going through the motions on a daily basis of just continuing to do the tasks that were set out. And so they were successful in that. They were doing their services and their work relatively well, but they all felt like they didn't know why they were doing it or where they were going. And every time they would release a new service or a new offering for their clients, it was interesting because they didn't really know why they were doing it, and they weren't really, those services weren't selling. So the whole thing had a odd sense of folks stumbling around in the dark, and by measuring on paper, being successful, but when getting together and discussing with each other, where's the company going? What is our purpose? Why is this happening? They were all frustrated.
So one of the things that you and I touched on as well is this company that you're talking about, their workforce was not all in a centralized location, right?
Yep.
So they were distributed and didn't necessarily get to see each other. So one of the things that comes out of organizational gravity is an alignment where the actions of all of the employees help to achieve that final, whatever the destination is that you're mapping to. So what were the outcomes once you applied the organizational gravity concept for them? What changed?
Well, when you're left without a unified purpose that everybody's striving for and understands that they're striving for, it ends up that folks end up on different agendas, right? They either end up on a personal agenda or they end up on a divisional agenda. Like this part of the company is going here for whatever reason, or I'm trying to go there. And so if you can imagine, if you have a relatively, reasonably large amount of folks in the workforce, right, or stakeholders involved, and you have enough areas of the company that are independent, there's multiple agendas now starting to happen, and you can't help but have friction in that instance. How do we know which of these agendas is the one we should be following? And when they run into each other head on and they're at an impasse, how do we know which one's on the right track and which one's not? Because we don't have that understanding. So it's really difficult when you have a remote. They had a remote workforce. They had remote managers. They were in different time zones. So communication. So you're not only confronted with the fact that you don't have that organizational gravity, but you also, the tools around communication and establishing that alignment are not helping in any way either.
And one of the things that you had mentioned was that when you go through the process of this, it brings all stakeholders into the fold. So folks that maybe might not be keeping, the long end game or the vision, the grander vision in mind when they've got a very small piece of the puzzle, they're just one cog, are all of a sudden illuminated about why their job is important within the bigger context.
And it's a great method of checks and balances also, because if you think about it, when you apply the questions to each area of the business, right? When you take those organizational gravity questions and you start looking at them over here, you have all of the stakeholders involved. So folks who usually aren't in that area or not commenting there they're able to weigh in, they're able to give ideas, they're able to explain how they thought or saw things, and it starts providing feedback into that area of the business. And this works in each area. It's not like we're picking on this area. Now this area is then discussing what's happening over here. And so you begin to align and influence. So different areas of the business influence other areas. And this is incredibly important, because one of the things I think we tend to not realize is we get siloed. Like if we're in the finance division or office of a company, we look at numbers all day and they become very meaningful in a specific way to us. And we're not aware of a whole lot of other things going on, like what the clients are saying, what the vendors are saying, how the workers feel, if the product is effective or not, how our marketing is. All that stuff's out there. We're just looking at these numbers and we become more and more ingrained in them. So this opens it up. So all the interconnections of the organization begin to be tied together, and everybody sort of has that understanding, has that influence. And that's why it's organizational gravity, right? We begin to rotate around that gravitational force, all of us understanding where we're going and how we interrelate. It's actually, when it works, it's a very powerful tool.
And you can't just set it and forget it. I mean, this is something that you have to revisit. So how frequently do you look at it, and how do you know when it's time to reset your organizational gravity?
Well, what was interesting about the client who had come to me is that on the surface, it doesn't feel necessarily like it had been that long of a time. I think they had been in business, I think it was about 7 years. And they had development in those 7 years. There had been some major pieces that occurred with the business. So you wouldn't think necessarily that organizational gravity would come into play in that period of time. At least that seems short to me. But the best way to sort of lay out an end goal for organizational development, for organizational gravity, is the vision, right? The vision is that statement of where we're going. And the fact that this particular organization's vision had been accomplished, I think, is quite interesting. And the fact that they weren't really aware of it, also sort of makes it apparent that they weren't necessarily checking in with the vision. It probably wasn't even on display, or it had become background noise for them, because it was pretty obvious, and it was pretty eye-opening for everyone there when we're talking about this. And I finally looked at it and I said, well, look at your vision. What's left to accomplish there? And everybody's eyes got kind of wide, and they stepped back, and they were sort of stunned, and they're like, wow, we actually did it. Well, for me, that shows a lack of leadership aligning and making sure that folks know where we're going. I mean, the fact that you couldn't tell that your vision was accomplished is telling in itself. But to answer your question specifically, I think there probably should be some sort of organizational gravity serious check-in for the entire company, probably every 2 years or so. And, is there a way to do that incrementally? Do you have check-ins with different divisions and then have some feedback? You probably can do that, but this works way better, and there's a lot more transparency and clarity when the whole organization is looking at it together. So it's probably one of those large-scale enterprises that you probably want to do once a year, maybe once every other year. It's not operational. It's not the small stuff. It'll take you down there. What it does is it starts you up here, and then it says, okay, here's where we're heading. Here's how, here's our plan to get there. Here's how it all relates. Here's the details. And if you do it well, you hit all of that. But its intention is to align the organization as a whole towards a purpose, not how are we operating? Are we profitable? It's not that set of questions. It's a set of questions around purpose, vision, all of us as a culture knowing where we're going and agreeing to go there and being excited to adapt as we go and achieve that vision.
And if people want a more detailed look at the questions, they can always go to Amazon and get the book, The Great Small Business Plateau and How to Blast Past It. There's a whole chapter in there about organizational gravity, which will walk folks through how to do this in your organization. But for the small business folks out there listening to this, Patrick, and wondering, this sounds pretty interesting, I'd like to do this for myself. Can you give us an idea, a quick overview of how a business would do this for themselves, or what types of resources might be available for them to get help with doing it for their business?
Well, I think one of the things that most folks are familiar with is the SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. And that's become sort of standardized in the business world. Now, there are some variations on that I find more useful because SWOT tends to drag us into very specific what pain points we have right now, what's right in front of our face. And it takes a little bit of effort to get out of the immediate or the shorter term, medium term, to go long term, to shift so we're seeing a broader scope when we're looking. I'm not sure folks do that with SWOT that well unless it's very well facilitated, but it is a start. The idea behind this is that we're going to sit down and we're going to ask some formative questions, right? These are going to be fierce questions. We're going to sit down, we're going to say, okay, what is our purpose as an organization? We're providing these services, and who are we providing them to? Are we doing it well? Are we innovative? Is the soul of our company being fulfilled, right? Do we all feel that this is a worthwhile endeavor? Does it feel as if our clients, our customers are appreciative that we're delivering in a way that is working? Is everybody here buying in and thriving? It's the type of questions of optimization, of getting the best out of everybody, of doing our best. So we're not tinkering with something like how to move the profit margin a little, how to reduce some costs over here, how to improve our marketing and interact with the chamber or our community. it's much more about the more sort of esoteric soul of the organization sort of feel. And then from there, you start asking hard questions. You start saying things like, okay, well, if our clientele doesn't seem as enamored with us as they did when we started, what is that? Is that our service? How is our service? Is that the product itself? Do we need to adapt it? Is it lost some oomph to it? Is it not quite on the cutting edge? Is there improvements there? Have we grown stale in how we communicate this? Are we paying enough attention and getting feedback from our clients? What about our vendors? So it becomes a series of really hard questions, looking more at the purpose of the business, the sense of direction of we know where we're going and we're excited to go there. It's much less about the operations. That piece happens, I think, on a daily basis. And I think it's a lot easier for folks to refresh their operational plans than it is to get into organizational gravity. I think we tend to go to, what are the current problems, not what are the current potentials, and how can we improve so that we have a better shot of, actualizing those potentials.
So I'm wondering, and I hate to put you on the spot, but do you have another example of a positive outcome or a totally changed scenario achieved through organizational gravity?
I do, and it's interesting because the first example I just gave was an organization that probably had about 45 employees, with a bunch of them overseas and all. I had an organization that had multiple locations in the United States. They're regional, and they probably had closer to 70-ish employees. So they're a little bit bigger and a little bit closer. And what was interesting was that each of those locations operated with a completely different set of parameters and vision and what they were trying to accomplish. So the idea that there was a overall overarching organization that everybody was working to the good of was sort of lost. They were in constant competition between locations, and it was friction. They were in competition. They were fighting. There were organizations saying, "Why are you applying that cost to us? We didn't benefit from any of that, and that's not how we want to do business, and that's not the image that we want to put out there." So as they were trying to unify these locations, we had to go through the process of organizational gravity. And what was interesting was that it was very much done in a top-down manner. There was an attempt to involve the locations and all, but the leadership was more interested in what could that location do for us right now than how do we get everybody aligned. And so it was a very bumpy process, and there was some collateral damage. There were people who decided to leave the organization because this was not a purpose or a vision that they could get on board with, and it was a long haul of turnover as they tried to sort of bring this directionally in and establish organizational gravity. I'm not sure that in the end they were successful, but I think it was a great example of why it's important and how quickly it can sort of spin out of control if it's not there. I mean, they had their little satellites were flying off from the main body. So that whole concept of gravity, I think, is an interesting one because it shows how the organization needs to have a center point and how everything needs to be attached to that center point.
That's a really interesting concept in terms of having multiple units. And I think trying to get everybody singing off the same sheet of music, as they say, for a prolonged period of time when you're separated in that way makes something like organizational gravity imperative.
But and it also brings out the issue, and there's a lot of things. This can be unwrapped. There's a lot to unpackage and unwrap here. But one of the things we always hear is, what should leaders be doing? And ultimately, leaders should be doing organizational gravity. They should not be doing micromanaging or operations or a host of things that we as small business owners tend to always get into. The leaders should be doing organizational gravity. That's their job. Keep the culture, align everything, check on the vision, make sure the purpose is there and that we're adhering to those goals and those objectives and those metrics that we've set. That's the leader's job, not get in here, deal with that client problem, go over here and deal with this IT problem. That probably means there isn't somebody at the navigation desk, right? And that's problematic for any organization.
Well, I think that's well said. Is there anything else that you want to leave us on other than that great summarization you just provided?
Only that I do think that the chapter in the book is a very good overview of this. And I do think that when and if you attempt to look into organizational gravity for your business, it's probably useful to have somebody help you, somebody from the outside help you navigate through this. This can quickly degenerate into, as I said, the micro issues, the pain points that are affecting the business in the present. And organizational gravity is a much larger, bigger concept than what are our clients complaining about right now.
If you had to just let people know, what is the difference between organizational gravity and strategic planning?
Well, strategic planning is one step from organizational gravity. Organizational gravity is the establishment of what the purpose is and the philosophy around how we're going to get that purpose. You can find many, many, many case studies where people go about strategic planning and the boxes are all checked, the plan is written, and it goes somewhere, filing cabinet somewhere, a box somewhere, Dropbox, wherever it goes there and it's never looked at again. By definition, we missed the organizational gravity step, because if organizational gravity had been done well, the strategic plan that came out of that would be being used by that organization. So strategic planning is one level to implementing something around vision. How are we going to get to that vision? If we don't have a vision, if we don't have organizational gravity, a strategic plan is not something that you need.
Thanks. That's pretty clear for me. I hope it's clear for all of our listeners out there. Thanks for tuning in today to SBI's Reigniting Small Business Podcast. We'll be back on Thursday with another episode. And I hope you enjoyed the lesson on organizational gravity. If you want more information, again, you can find the book, The Great Small Business Plateau and How to Blast Past It by Patrick Lee on Amazon. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.